you've got to have what your clients need. So you've got to understand how are they running their business? How are they running their households? What challenges are they facing? What are kind of the pain points that they're experiencing and the solutions? So it's knowing your clients, but then also knowing what's coming down the pike and watching as things develop.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Typhon. Typhon is the creator of Infinia, a dramatically better digital banking platform for community financial institutions, as well as several platform-agnostic, revenue-generating point solutions. Our highly configurable platform and broad ecosystem of third-party partners ensure our entire suite is scalable and extensible to meet the needs of any FI. On our podcast, you will hear host Josh DeTar discuss today's most pressing financial technology topics with seasoned industry experts from every possible discipline.
Your podcast hasn't officially made it until there's ads in it. But this is one you're not going to want to skip past. And, well, if you do, feel free to hit that fast forward 15 seconds button twice. Ever wonder what gives me my energy and enthusiasm during these podcasts? Outside of my relentless desire to learn about, connect, share, and build up community FIs and their mission to support the communities they serve. It's coffee, and lots of it. Now, you want to know what's better than your regular old coffee? How about donating $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals through Credit Unions for Kids every time you purchase high-quality, ethically sourced coffee that also provides living wages to coffee farmers? So if you want to listen to this episode with epic levels of caffeine-induced focus and help kids in need, head to javaforkids.org to learn more and buy a bag or 10. Thanks.
Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Tyler Marshall, the EVP COO of PrimeBank. The most amazing part of hosting a podcast is the opportunity to talk to people with unique ideas and perspectives. Tyler is one of those curious individuals who seeks out new ideas, new ways of doing things, and likes to be held accountable by his foundational moral core to explore those new things. Funny enough, Tyler actually held up a little sign for me that sits on his desk every day to demonstrate the commitment he has to evolving and innovating. The sign says, "But we've always done things this way," with a big red line through it. Seeing Tyler so ruthlessly committed to that sentiment gets me excited. Not excited for me or even just this episode, although it definitely does that as well. But it gets me excited for this industry, knowing there are people like Tyler setting out to make a difference. If you're a consistent listener of this podcast, hopefully you'll know I want to openly discuss the challenges in our industry as much as the opportunities. Tyler has spent his entire professional life in the banking industry. He's seen it all, and he can be one of the first ones to attest to there is a lot of, well, this is how we've always done it in banking. Tyler will tell it to you bluntly. That ain't going to cut it anymore. The world is changing with or without you. Now, the bright side is the world is changing in a way that he believes that if traditional banking embraces it and changes alongside it, it will only make community FIs better at living up to the value proposition of making a meaningful impact on the lives of their account holders possible. In his heart, Tyler cares deeply about building trusted relationships with the people he comes into contact with. He cares about treating people with respect, kindness, and dignity, and he has zero patience for BS and overly corporate conversations that fail to communicate with people in a human way. He says, "I have one personality. It's deeply passionate, it's unbridled in its pursuit of trust, and it's packaged with a healthy dose of dry sarcasm. You're going to get what you're going to get." Tyler said, "I'm allergic to buzzwords, LOL. So, with a personality like this, we're going to have a lot of good conversation today about breaking down the barriers of the past to explore what the future of banking could and should look like. Plus, as a hardcore UT football fan and for a hot minute ex-radio DJ, Tyler's going to bring the excitement. So with that, welcome to the podcast, Tyler. I'm excited to have you, man.
Thanks. I'm excited to be on.
All right, so we got to start by showing people this little sign that you showed me. This is pretty awesome.
You know what's funny about this is there are going to be people that worked with me 15 years ago who are going to be like, oh my God, he still has that thing. You can actually see it's developed a little bit of a patina over the years.
That's legit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fun story behind that is you were saying, so that's actually a button, right? And you actually turned it into even buttons that for some big projects around the bank, you guys have actually worn those buttons, even as just kind of a visual reminder to yourselves and each other. Like, hey, is the answer to this, well, that's because how we've always done it, or because we've decided this is the right way to do it?
Right. Yeah. So we went through a core conversion, converted our core processor and digital stack and everything earlier this year. And so I had the buttons recreated for the entire staff. And so that was kind of our, moniker for the project.
So maybe go back in history a little bit and, just talk about some of your experience. And so why is that so important to you to not just do things the way we've always done it? And like, what are some of the experiences that you've seen of that happening where you're like, hey, that was an example of where we did something just because that was how we've always done it versus that was the right way to do it?
Well, I think that just generally speaking, people they don't change until they have cause to change. And that cause takes different effects, different forms for different people. I have spent the last 5 or so years helping to build de novo banks. And the way that's done these days typically is to purchase, a smaller bank and just kind of build it out, acquire the charter, re-headquarter it, that kind of thing. And so a lot of times the banks that you get, they were done. They were ready to sell, and so they had kind of reached a place in their development where they were sort of just holding steady, and so you come in and what you see is, well, it ain't broke. And so it's been done that way for, you may be looking at a 20, 30-year-old, procedure or ways of doing things. And it's, my perspective that the longer you've been doing something a certain way, the more likely you're not doing it the best way that you could. And so, as things get stale, you should definitely look at turning them over. And we're talking about, from going from papers in drawers, signature cards and documents in drawers, just to image documents sometimes gives you a perspective on how far back we're talking about. And then, of course, dragging it all into the very new space. Sometimes it's a major paradigm shift, and people are either down for it or they're not. Usually they are. But
one of the things that I've noticed recently too is seeing folks get kind of defensive about, especially if they created said process or picked said product or whatever it may be, right? And almost this idea that that's no longer correct is like calling their baby ugly, right?
Right.
And it's like, hey, that's not actually necessarily the case, right? Like, let's go back in time. So let's say, whatever, let's just, we use our example for the name of the podcast. Like you picked a digital banking provider 10 years ago, right? And now we're coming in saying it's outdated, it's not doing the things. And you're the person who picked it and you're still at the bank today, right? And you're sitting there going, well, no, I picked that. Like, I have to defend that. And it's like, no, I'm not saying, like, if we go back 10 years ago, you may have picked the absolute best thing at the time, knowing what you knew then, right?
For sure.
Or you put this process in place 10 years ago and knowing what you knew then and having the tools that you had 10 years ago, absolutely. That was a very, very good idea. It's just not anymore. And it's okay that it's not anymore. That's nothing against you personally. It's nothing against the institution. It's just times have changed.
For sure. Yeah, change is the only constant, in life, but definitely in our industry. And so, embracing that, leading into that, you and I talked a little bit. I think that the changes that have taken place have been for the better, almost entirely. The way we do things now is so much more effective and efficient and customer centric. All these advances in technology and processes and all these things have all made the customer experience, just better and better and better, which is the goal. It's the whole point.
Yeah, I'd love for you to kind of set that foundation first. So if you had no roadblocks whatsoever, right? From process to policy to, technology, you name it. Like there's no barrier for you. I mean, what are you trying to accomplish? And what are you trying to do as a community bank that's like such a part of your soul?
Well, I think community banks play an integral role in the communities that we serve. I think just fundamentally what we do forms kind of a backbone. The way we allow people to accomplish what it is they need to do personally, professionally, the way they run their business, they dream of doing this, want to take on that, the next challenge, the next goal. And we literally support them in those endeavors, and we keep them safe. We keep their money safe, which is chief among our responsibilities. And I think we're uniquely positioned to do those things better than I think you size out of that model where you know your customers, you know their needs and their challenges, their kind of priorities, but you know them personally. You know their family, you know their business. You're probably a customer of their business, things like that. And so there are a lot of advantages to, banking that way. And so I think from that perspective, we reinvest in the communities that we serve. That's our purpose.
If you listen to this podcast, you're no stranger to it. I really believe and support that model. It's cool to hear you talk about that because, then you have to unpack everything else, right? Where it's like, hey, at the end of the day, all we really and truly care about is we want to do good for the communities that we serve in, right? We want to financially empower the people that live, work in our communities. And, we want them to be account holders of our financial institutions. So we have the opportunity to serve them in that manner, right? And so you have to kind of back everything else out of that. And, that's where we start talking about, okay, well, what is your role in that? And what are the things that are both helping and hurting your ability to accomplish those goals? And to your point, like that's changing. And so that world just looks very different. We were kind of talking just before we started recording about, there's been a really huge change in banking just since the advent of the internet. But I think we both agreed that there's an even bigger change coming than just the change we've seen over the last, 25, 30 years. And so, you said you think this actually is a good thing, right? Because it's going to help you do more of what you were just talking about, the thing you actually care about, right? Like nobody cares about doing a core conversion or, creating policy documents. You care about what's the impact that's going to come out of that. You have to do those things to be able to have the impact. So as the world is changing and giving you more opportunities to do the good, like what do you see is kind of coming that's going to help you to focus more of your energies on the stuff you want to do versus the stuff you have to do?
I think, all the innovations, there are a few things that I'm excited about in terms of the way in which things are kind of evolving. I think all these innovations technologically over the last couple decades, I think bottom line, the effect is it's easier for people to do their banking and it's safer. And, I think one of the things that I'm excited about is the way, as the digital stack evolves, what's cool to me is that there are all these different industries and kind of purposes for which these fintech companies are creating solutions. And the innovation around those is driven from within the industry or the friend group or the club or organization or whatever it is. They're the ones driving that innovation toward what they need. And so our job as the bank is to make sure that we can talk to all those different solutions in a way that keeps us kind of the hub. And, so that's exciting. I think the innovation that's being done across all these different, stacks is being done by the people that should be. What do I know? What do we as the bank know about what, your mortgage company or your, escrow or whatever the case may be, what you need for your kids, the different solutions out there to kind of manage your allowances and all these kind of different things. We can't and shouldn't be, as your bank, the innovator behind all of that. And the way things are kind of shaping up, we're not. Our job is to accommodate and plug in and talk to all these different solutions that you use for all these things. I think that's really exciting because there's no limit to that model of innovation around all these solutions, whereas there definitely is and would always be if it was just the banks doing it.
I hopefully, obviously, haven't been around for 100+ years. Although if I have, I'd like to think that I aged pretty well. But
No.
I wasn't around before, really internet being a part of banking. And so if you think back to just, the days where the only interactions you had with your financial institution were in person, there was a limiting factor to that, right? Like the only times that I had interactions was, there was even a time where you truly had to physically go into the branch. Like you didn't even call them, right? And so we went from that to at least being able to call, but still the interaction points were, probably fewer and further between than they are today. If you consider just logging into digital banking and an activity with your financial institution. So it's fewer and further between, but they were probably a lot more meaningful and impactful, right? If I drove, 20 minutes away from the farm to go to the bank, like it's because I needed to have a conversation, I needed to do something. And I probably spent a few minutes to make sure that, that was a meaningful part of my day too. And so to your point, like now we're at a place where we actually have more ability to engage with them more often without a lot of those barriers. But at the same time, if we don't kind of capitalize on the way that those are actually being done, then we're missing the opportunity. And I think the point I'd like to have you talk a little bit more about is that point of, so again, if you go back that 100 years and I had to physically go into the branch, right? Banking, in terms of like the products and services that we offer, hasn't changed a lot since then, right? It's everything around us that has changed. So, if you're kind of doing things the way you've always done them as a bank, and you're thinking like bankers and hiring bankers, to your point, like you're not a technology company, right? You're not on the tip of the spear of innovating in terms of digital engagement, right? So now you're kind of reliant on an ecosystem. So how do you navigate that? And sorry, that was like, I probably gave you like 4 different topics to think about in that rant, but like,
No, yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I think you've got to approach that progression proactively. I think that you've got to think strategically in terms of, your partnerships, your vendor partnerships. We as a community bank don't build these software platforms, don't maintain them. That's not, proprietary platforms are not, an option for us from an expense standpoint. So that strategic partner, vendor partner that you choose to go with on core processor, digital banking, all that kind of stuff is probably the single most important, decision that you make along those lines. And I think you're, looking for a partner who is thinking the way we are, the way this conversation is going. You're looking for, a like-minded partner along those lines that's constantly, developing and iterating and bringing things in, and is also aware that they can't do all of the innovating and developing. So they're focused on, playing well with others, being able to plug in all the different things, build custom things that you need, and all that. And so that's got to be the mindset for both you and your, critical vendors that provide these things. But also there should be, a planning years ahead, for the next year or two. There's got to be a roadmap, that you're continuously updating and, staying abreast of, all the things that are becoming available and when they're becoming available, and watching, I think there's this inflection point that you get to as different features and solutions and things come available where, the need for it, like from your clients, the appreciation, the need, the interest in it meets the point where you can afford it and where, it makes sense to spend that money. And, or something like FedNow as an example, I think FedNow will eventually run the table on real-time payments, or they have I'm kind of going out on a limb there. I should say, I think they have the capacity to, but you want to make sure that around things like that the rules have matured, around it as well. And so there's kind of this inflection point where you're constantly looking and listening and learning and watching and just paying attention. And then you're like, oh, this is it. I'm in, on each of these different things. But you've got to be thinking that way and planning that way, I think.
So now you've reciprocated and given me like 12 things to try and think about.
Okay.
Just your last conversation. But I want to come back to kind of, how do you allocate budget to kind of meet this changing world, right? I definitely want to come back to what your views of instant payments and specifically FedNow is going to do to the industry. But before I do, I wanted to go back to one other thing that you were talking about. As you were saying it, I don't know, I got this like mental picture in my head that I don't know if I'd ever really thought about it this way before you were talking about it. Could you imagine going back to a very like paint yourself the quintessential like bank CEO, maybe even just 30 years ago, and going up to them and going, hey, just FYI, your most important relationship to make sure that your bank is connected and serving your customers the best is going to be the person that helps you put it on a cell phone.
Right.
Right? They'd be like, you're smoking crack, man. You're so crazy. Like, yeah. But in just 30 years, like that's true, right? I mean, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, you're probably your number one. I will argue, and this is not just, the dude who works for a digital banking company, but I will argue that today your digital banking vendor may be your fundamentally most important relationship because they are the face of your brand anymore, right? Like we were saying, I mean, the number of times I interact with my financial institution via digital banking versus every single other channel combined is like orders of magnitude different, at least for me personally.
Sure. Well, and the ways that has changed. So I think, you still need branches from my perspective and my studies. You need branches, but the nature of the interactions that take place in those branches have completely changed. They are no longer transactional in the vast majority of markets. They are consultative. They're still coming in, but it's not to, deposit their check. They can't remember the last time they did that in person, or whatever the case may be in terms of just teller transactions and things like that, up to and inclusive of opening accounts, a lot of that. But they come into the bank to talk to somebody, to have you look at this with them and talk through it and figure out and get advice, from a subject matter expert. And so you still need to be there, but that it looks totally different. But then also, when it comes to planning for, disaster recovery, business continuity, things like that, your digital stack is now better be, in my opinion, my professional opinion, better be at the top of what you plan to, your maximum downtime on that better be pretty short, because that's the way that your customers are actually interacting with your bank, on a day-to-day basis.
So how does that kind of influence for you? Actually, a little bit of background. So one of the things we didn't talk about in your intro is your like original thought process for career path, and you went to school for marketing. Right. So I always think that that's a really fascinating personality to talk to in banking, because kind of like what we were talking about earlier of sometimes like this is the way we've always done it. And, the world of banking hasn't necessarily changed for whatever reason. In now my personal humble opinion, like marketing is this, weird like outlier for community financial institutions. And it's almost like a dirty 4-letter word type of thing. And it doesn't get done very often. And it definitely doesn't get done to the level of some of the new fintechs and some of the new, just different entrants into financial services, take banking out of the equation, right? And so we're getting left behind in that sense. But so from your perspective as somebody who like thinks with a marketing brain, how are you thinking about what does this kind of next evolution look like? How does digital play into that? And how do we need to be thinking about marketing in that whole equation?
Well, I think that now more than ever, consumers of any good or service are interested in who you are as an organization. I think they care about your core values, what you're about. And I think a lot of, setting the table for that is telling the story of, you know, how you view yourself and your core values and things like that as an organization. I think it does matter. I remember my economics teacher in high school kind of introducing the concept of voting with your dollars. And I think that's what we do as a society nowadays is, we're not willing to do business with somebody with an organization that does people dirty or, whatever the case may be. And so I think now more than ever, it's important to tell, the community who you are. And so the approach that we take a lot and have had success with is finding ways to participate and engage in the community, whether it's, charitable organizations or local high schools. We just happen to be right across the street. Our Austin branch just happens to be right across the street from a local high school that has a huge football program. And we host a tailgate for every one of their home events. And it's a blast. We got food sponsors and, all these different cool things that we can do. But, and of course we, post and we create content to help them, on all their kind of stuff. But just that tie-in gives an indication of who we are as an organization. So that's just kind of one example of that. And then, I think that marketing is another thing that's easier to do than ever. We've got all these channels where we can, present ourselves and our products and services in all these different ways, and interact with, customers via email. I think email has been a really good channel in community banking if you cultivate it and you don't misuse it. So you're not getting, junked and spam or whatever. If you can open up that, direct connection with your client base and only use it for important stuff, messaging over, advertising kind of thing, that's a really important channel. And then I think you got to be present on the social platforms and things like that.
It's funny. I was kind of thinking about this while you're talking about it too. It's like, again, I have to almost treat myself as an outlier sometimes if I use myself as I don't want to try and be like the conduit for the masses in our industry, right? Because I work in the industry, so I think like we do and those kinds of things. But it's just like you think about how much direct mail used to be a big part of community financial institutions marketing, right? And it still is. And I love when I talk to marketers for financial institutions, they're like, oh yeah, but like if you get something in the mail from your bank, right, it's important. So obviously you're going to open it. Contrary, me, anytime I see it's from my bank, I immediately run it through the shredder. I don't even bother to open it because I know that I have everything set up digitally to manage my life with my financial institution. So the only thing they could possibly be sending me is like something that regulatorily they were just required to mail me a piece of paper for, which fine, then it's literally just updating me on something that like the Apple terms and conditions I'm probably never going to read in the first place. Or right. Two, it's something marketing, right?
Right. What are they going to, they're going to Google it. They're going to Google it. If they're curious about what's going on. So if I meet somebody at an event, and I share my card or my LinkedIn or whatever the case may be, they're going to Google me. And so it's about being intentional about owning that story. What is it that they're going to see? And, you've got a brand, whether you like it or not. And it is online, whether you like it or not. So it's really not a matter of choosing whether you're going to do that. It's choosing whether you're going to own it or somebody else is. And so I think that's kind of the main thing is taking control of, because that's what's going to happen. If I put your mail in the trash and I think, oh man, I wonder if there was something going on, I'm going to Google, I'm going to go to your website, whatever your Facebook, whatever the case may be, and see if you've posted about it.
You said you're allergic to buzzwords, but we got to talk about one of them, and that's AI. And what I think is also coming, whether we want to realize it or not, is the way people Google is about to change too. Right. I can tell you for me, it has absolutely changed. Right. So I go to ChatGPT now to ask more, like if I'm Googling like just someone's website, then I may just Google what is their website, right? If I want to go to their webpage. But if I actually want to learn something about them, I will actually use ChatGPT anymore, right? And so I'd be really curious to see how many financial institutions have done the exercise of like asking ChatGPT, and I'll put you on the spot, Tyler. Like, have you gone to ChatGPT and been like, hey, what do consumers think of Prime Bank? Hey, why should I join Prime Bank? Hey, what is Prime Bank's value proposition, right? Like that would be a fascinating exercise to go through, is to go ask ChatGPT. Because I can guarantee you, like, that is the next evolution of search for consumers.
For sure. Well, and you can see, even just on a Google search now, they've got that little bot, which I think is sort of in beta, but may not be. But that little bot right below the search box that's essentially doing the same thing. It's kind of pulling back a meta kind of AI response to it, and from all those different sources. And so I need to just as a matter of due diligence. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm actually going to make myself a note. GPT, but it's the same deal. It's, you can either participate or not, but it's going to happen in spite of you. So you better, be in control of the narrative there.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, that's why, like, I made kind of, for those of you who are not watching the actual video recording of this episode, like, I made a very on purpose visual facial display when Tyler mentioned social media, and you got to be on it. Because that, again, it's like marketing is a dirty 4-letter word in financial institutions. And like social media is even the 4-letter word in that so many times. And it's one of those like, okay, that's great. You don't do social media in your personal life, or you don't believe in it, or we've never done it before, so we're going to stay off of it. I hate to break it to you, but consumers are there, whether you like it or not, right?
For sure.
And I think I don't remember if I made it on a podcast or just in a conversation, but I was talking to somebody about TikTok the other day too. And I was like, hey, look, whether you like it or not, right? Whether you like it or not, whether the government trusts it or not, is going to kill it off or not, it doesn't matter. Kids are on TikTok, right? And not just kids. I mean, people are on TikTok. American consumers are on TikTok, and they are searching for information on financial services. It's one of the top searched for things on TikTok. People don't believe me when I say that, but people are looking for it. And there's some decent information out there on TikTok. There's also a lot of hot garbage and just really bad advice.
Yeah.
But it's out there and it's prevalent. And so whether you like it or not, and whether you want to admit that like this is one of those things that just because we haven't done it before is not a good excuse of why we're not going to do it now. Like, you got to get on social media.
Agreed. But the other thing is, you don't have to do it like everybody else does it.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so you kind of mentioned in the intro how I'm allergic to buzzwords. You will never get on my LinkedIn and see me using words like dynamic and, like all these, had an amazing day talking with these dynamic leaders from blah, 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 and I'm not belittling or putting down. That's just not my personality. I'm sure they mean that when they post things, the same headline, same wording, same sort of buzzwordy stuff over and over. That is not meaningful for me or for my organization. This executive team is, we are real people and we talk like real people, and the bank, speaks with that voice of real people. You don't have to, I'm in that camp where I cross my eyes, or like when I see all these posts and just so like, those organizations that just are like constantly, every person they ever hired, everything they ever participated in, every check they ever wrote, kind of thing where they just beat you to death. We have an option. We have the ability to make the decisions to do it the way we want it, the way that's meaningful for us. And I would encourage banks to do that. But like I say, it's happening whether you like it or not. So you can either be there and participate, control it, or let it control, let the metaverse, whatever you want to call it, control what the narrative is about your bank.
That brings me to something I really wanted to talk to you about, because it was so apparent in some of our conversations, and you've kind of touched on it a few times throughout our episode today, is just this concept of fun, right? And of just being real people. And, Tyler and I were talking before we actually hit record today, just about, I made the comment of like, look, I guarantee you can find the most stereotypical, like quintessential, stodgy looking old school banker. They're still a person at the end of the day. They still want to have fun, right? They still want to laugh. They still want to smile, right?
Right.
And whatever it may be that brings that out. And we do. I feel like so many times we get so wrapped up in what we think the world expects us to be, right?
Right.
Because I am an executive at the company, I am expected to have this personality. Oh,
Right.
one of the things my organization knows is I sure as hell am probably not that personality. Like, I'm transparent to a fault. I'm going to keep people informed. There's no secrecy. Like, I'm going to come to a meeting and, I'm going to totally derail the thing because something was funny and we're just going to have fun. And you know what? The agenda didn't get met, but you know what? We all had a good laugh out of it. And just because that's what we are. Like, we are just, at the end of the day, we are people. And we're trying to navigate this one life we get, this one shot we get on this, rock hurtling through space. What are you going to do with it? Right? And I don't know about you, but I do know about you. Like, I want to have fun while I'm here. Like, I want to have fun.
sure.
I want to have genuine conversations. I don't need this like weird thing between us of expectations. And people want to do that with your bank too, right? Like, they want to
Yeah,
do
for
business
sure.
with somebody, like you said, that they believe in, that is a part of their community, they have fun with.
Yeah, one of my favorite trends that has taken place, at least in Austin, and I know it's probably not true everywhere, is just sort of this casualization a little bit. Over time, customers don't want to walk in and talk to a suit. They want to walk in and talk to a person. They want to interact with a person through whichever channel they come through. And so, some of the funniest things that ever happened to me were in a room with a stodgy old banker in a big boxy suit. Like the funniest things anybody ever said, the craziest, off the wall stuff happened, and so they were people in there, with a personality kind of thing. And so I think it's a positive trend that we're normalizing being ourselves. Obviously there is some, needs to be a nod to, decorum and propriety at a certain point, like,
Totally. Yeah.
that kind of thing. But that doesn't,
Yeah.
that
If
doesn't
it's like
preclude-
at your core to be a nudist, I don't know if I really want you in the boardroom like that.
perhaps
Just
not
throw
in
it
the
out there.
boardroom. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Knock yourself out after work, kind of thing. Other than that, and so I think that's a great trend, and I love to see.
It's kind of freeing though too, right? Like, it's a lot more fun.
is.
Like, I don't feel like I'm always walking on eggshells. We were talking about this internally recently, and I was kind of having the same conversation with somebody else about like the whole, anytime we go out in person, we have a fun little thing that we always, it's a long story, I'll spare you. Maybe I'll tell you later if you're curious. But so our team always wears a pair of red matching Chucks everywhere we go, right?
Yes.
And I was having a conversation with somebody internally. We were actually headed to a fairly stereotypical like Midwest bank. And we were talking about like, do you change your style of dress for the bank? And we were like, no, like this is who we are. We are who we are. And that'll tell you a lot about our organization. And you will either align to that or you won't. And if you don't, then that's actually probably a good thing too, because we don't want to get into a toxic relationship later because we pretended to be something that we weren't. Anyway, the long and short of it, Tyler, what I thought was so cool was we show up to this meeting. We're on site. We go into the boardroom. And one of the first people I meet is a woman, executive of the bank, arms bare, full sleeves of tattoos, full showing.
Nice.
And I was like,
Yeah.
these are our kind
Okay.
of people.
This is gonna go great. Yeah.
This is gonna be great. And an awesome time.
Yeah.
Because it totally, even just that recognition, she even made the comment about the red Chucks, right? I'm seeing the tattoos on her arms. And we just immediately, like, all the guards dropped in the room. And it was a very different type of conversation.
And think of all the energy. So think of all the energy we're recouping because we're not expending it, focusing on what outfit we should have worn, potentially purchasing, laying out time and energy and resources, purchasing the appropriate clothing to, go and be not ourselves someplace. Think of all that energy that we kept that we can just put back into better endeavors.
I had no idea we were going down this path with this podcast, but
But
that's a point though, right? Like again, like I think this is why I love doing this podcast, is because I just get to have real conversations with people. Like there's no agenda. We don't go into this with a script. Like I didn't give Tyler 10 pre-canned questions that I was going to ask him beforehand. And I think that speaks to what you were talking about. And even, I put into your intro was just, we just want to communicate on a human level. Right. And absolutely, there are certain levels of professionalism that need to be a part of that. That's a part of the human dynamic, right? But at the same time, we do. It's so much easier when we can just come down to a level where we both feel comfortable to just be ourselves, have a conversation. And two, I think that's where you start to identify, again, like what you were talking about, like you're genuinely curious about people's unique ideas and perspectives. And if you kind of go in with that wall up, people are going to be, far more reticent to actually share those things with you. And you're probably going to learn and grow a lot less because of it.
Agreed. Yes. And, if you are not, as a marketer, things are evolving quickly in our industry. And if you are not getting to know people, how do you know what they want and need, what challenges they're facing, what their priorities are, that kind of thing. And so I think it's vitally important to have that, real, honest connection there.
Well, and like you were saying too, I think that when that is the internal culture of the bank, right, that permeates externally. Sure. And I agree. One of the things I wanted to come back to is you were talking about, the good that community banks do in the community and how you guys do, the tailgate for the high school football games and stuff like that. Like that's not you trying to accomplish anything other than that's just what you want to do, right? Like you even said, like, you're like, I'm a total like football geek. Like there's a new level of excitement in my household because it's football season coming up, right? Like, so that's genuine. That's organic for you. And I always kind of make the comment when we talk about marketing for community financial institutions and talking about the good that you do, it's not like a big oil company coming to me and saying, like, our number one priority is the environment and we care about like, no, you don't. Like, let's be honest here. You're digging up dead dinosaurs trying to put that into my car. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for it. Like, I'm a sports car guy. I like to burn gas, but just level set with me. Like, you're not here to save the environment. You're here to protect the fact that at some point you're going to run out of that old dinosaur juice. And you're trying to figure out how do you make as much money until that point happens, and then have some sort of transition plan after it so you can continue to make money. But like, don't try and put this facade around it's because you care about the environment, right? So that just feels disingenuous. But when a community bank comes to me and says, like, hey, we do the things that we do because I'm like, no, that checks out. Like that maths for me.
Yeah. And it's not a move. Like, it's not like we were going to do that anyway, so it's just a matter of, being willing to show, to the community, just examples of who you are and connect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like you said, and if you're having fun in doing that, right? I think fun is even just almost an interpretation of genuineness, right? Like when you feel like you're being really, really genuine and yourself, like you kind of have fun doing that. And when people see you having fun, they assume that like, oh no, like if Tyler's this energetic and he's having this much fun and he's smiling this much about this, like that's probably pretty true. That probably checks out here. Yeah. And so if they feel like, oh, you know what? The bank is having a lot of fun with the way they're communicating. Like that's kind of cool. Maybe there's something to that. Like why? Like what are they doing? Why should I care? Yeah. I think that is a really big part of internal culture that is something that is changing and that the external world is really looking for. Like you said, like they want to see that genuineness. They want to see the, corporate social responsibility. That's not just a thing. It's not just a saying. Like people genuinely care about it. And to your point, like they vote with their dollars over it. So what are you doing to both do that in a genuine way? And then two, like show it. But like you said, it shouldn't be it's so obvious that all the bank is ever doing is just showing, oh, we did the, the one that drives me nuts. I think you'll like this. The one that drives me nuts is I see it all the time on the LinkedIn's. And I made the joke too that it's like, I know as a marketer, if I want to like take my LinkedIn stats through the roof, I know how to do it. I'm just not going to do it because I see a lot of it. And it's the, look at this random footage that some random stranger caught of me helping this little old lady across the street. And I'm like, dude, that's so staged. Knock it off.
Staged. And that's
Like,
exactly the brand of BX that, it's like, I wish there was like I wish there was a series of buttons, everything from like rolling your eyes to like progressively,
this is obnoxious BS. Like, just get this out of here. Like,
less
it's so
of that.
obvious what you're doing.
Yes.
But the genuine side of fun, I think that is what consumers are looking for. And they are getting new tools to be able to help identify that and see that. And I think it's having an impact. And I think that is a big part of kind of the change that we've been talking about. But kind of talking about change. So, you talked about kind of two other big things that I wanted to come back to. Let's start with a little bit of so if we're talking about, there's been this huge technology shift and this, big shift in the expectations that consumers have with not just banking, but just interactions as a whole through technology. How does that influence the budget at the bank? Like, how do you guys actually start to change your thinking and say, my technology budget 10 years ago may have been, I'm just making stuff up, $1 million. And so therefore this year it grows with inflation. So it's, $1.023 million. Is that, or are you saying, no, everything has changed. It's got to be $20 million. Like, how does that impact your budget?
I wish that was my budget.
Yeah. You and me both.
I think it starts with, I talked a little bit about that inflection point where, the need, and the cost and the rules and all the things kind of come together, and that there's this point where it's time to jump in. And so I think it starts with knowing what's coming, knowing your clients. First and foremost, you've got to have what your clients need. So you've got to understand how are they running their business? How are they running their households? What challenges are they facing? What are kind of the pain points that they're experiencing and the solutions, and so it's knowing your clients, but then also knowing what's coming down the pike and watching as things develop so you can kind of plan. You can't, if you haven't gone to a trade meeting, a conference, each of the cores have their, user conference every year, kind of a big information sharing kind of event. And then you've got kind of the ancillary organizational meetings that take place every now and then. TBA, IBAT, for example, are Texas organizations. And then each of the, companies that offer the different solutions has their own kind of newsletters that you can join and, events that you could attend, that kind of stuff. And so if you've not done that in a couple of years, then you're too late on something. Like it's going to cost you more. You're going to scramble to get ready for it where you wouldn't have, so it's just building that pipeline and that kind of roadmap a couple of years in advance and as all those things kind of align. And so the budget doesn't always have to grow year over year. I mean, most solutions nowadays are volume based, and so they're going to grow just organically, but you may have a year where you can, add some value pretty cheaply, or you may have a big year where you bring on some major solution that, increases, that line item 25% kind of thing. And so it just kind of depends on the solutions and how they're evolving, but there better be a plan, and that plan better reach out, a year or two, and you're kind of charting your cost, as you go along.
I like that you talk about the kind of inflection point though, because I think one of the other things that, we have to be conscientious about is hype cycle. And just because it's the thing that everybody is talking about doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be the thing that your entire budget needs to restructure around. Right. And so for me, it always kind of comes down to, does this actually provide real meaningful benefit and value to our consumers? Right. Or is this going to just fall into the hype cycle? And I probably overuse the analogy. There's probably more that I can think of, but it's an easy one is, the crypto craze stuff. It is absolutely still here, right? That's a whole nother podcast to talk about the long-term impacts and place, I think, of crypto. And I'm going to park my feelings and stuff on that aside. But just from the standpoint of, I remember when, Elon Musk is making statements that send Dogecoin through the roof, and it's on every late night show and SNL and you name it, right? I remember how many financial institutions were coming to me and being like, we have got to offer buy, sell, hold crypto and digital banking. And I was like, why?
Yeah.
Like, you got to articulate to me why. Just because it's on, the late night shows and just because Elon Musk is talking about it, that's not a good enough answer. Like, how are you going to use it to provide value? How is it going to align to your strategic objectives, right? And fast forward to today, and I don't think I've had that conversation once this year. Right?
Yeah. Well,
so if you invest a bunch of money into it without a plan for how to actually operationalize it to provide value, then you wasted budget, you wasted effort on hype cycles. So how do you balance those things internally for you guys?
Hype it matters. It's for it gets it on your radar. So yeah, maybe I go look at it. It's like, wow, maybe there's something here. You go study it, you get up to speed on it, that kind of thing. But has a single client of yours asked for it? Has anyone expressed interest in it from inside the house? Do you have, and depending on what the solution is, what the feature is, do you have a pipeline for entry into that market? Do you have a gateway client or connection or whatever that's going to open up that market for you if you want to, open up something totally new? If the answers to all of those are no, then for what? There's got to be a use case. There's got to be a justification for it. There are opportunities here and there, and on a smaller scale, typically in my experience, for you to kind of create the need, where you just kind of introduce some little tweak or thing here and there. But opening up a whole new business line, you had better have a rock solid, justification for it. And I think, I've seen banks kind of go down rabbit holes and waste, money, trying to be leading edge on something when there was not, the use case or the right connection to open up the entry into that market.
That brings up a good point too, that I think if your answer, so let's go back to my example of just the, buy, sell, hold of crypto, right? If your answer when I ask you, why are you doing this, is because it's all over the news and it's hype, and I don't know if it'll actually provide a lot of value or anything, but we see this as a way to demonstrate to consumers in our market that we're leading edge. So we're going to market the ever living crap out of this thing, and we're going to use it to hopefully generate some hype cycle for ourselves. Then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, at least you have a strategy around it, right? And you understand its place. Okay. But if it's just because there's an interesting balance of doing things the way we've always done them, or doing things just because everyone else is doing them. Like, neither of those are actually the right way of doing things. Yeah. You got to evaluate for yourself, is this the right thing for us?
Sure. And they're, demonstrating that you're, tech forward. There are lots of different ways to do that. But you know what I like to demonstrate? Profitability. Because the other thing that's kind of different now, just in the last couple of years after the SVB stuff, is, our performance is on clients' radar at a level that it never was before. And we talk about all of those, the ability to move money in real time through these platforms. It's fantastic. There's no longer a line, in the situation that there's a liquidity issue or the perception of a liquidity issue, there's no longer a line outside the bank of people, waiting to get their money. I read an article that SVB was wiring out $3 million a minute at the height of that run. And so my thought is, if I'm flushing money down the toilet, and pulling away from the bottom line to give it a perception about something, I'd rather give the perception that we are solvent and that we're performing well, and that we're also, giving you what you need. But that's, it's a matter of, I guess, theory on that.
No, that's it. Okay. So that's a good, so that was one of the other things that I wanted to come back to. I really wanted to get, you brought up one of the things that you feel, and keep me honest here on my recollection of kind of how you were talking about you were talking about the things that were going to like fundamentally change our industry. And you talked about instant payments and FedNow. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the impacts, the pros, the cons? How are you looking at kind of this next evolution of money movement?
Well, I think it has the potential to supplant, both wires and ACH, and to take, payments, through all the other, there are a zillion different payments, platforms out there. I think it could kind of take those to the next level. And it also opens up all these different use cases for, these payments. And so who knows is my answer. My educated response is who knows, but there's going to be, a shift there. And, we as a bank have got to be mindful from a risk standpoint of the ease and speed with which, deposits can leave the bank. Gathering deposits is, a major challenge for all of us right now, especially in light of those, kind of recent events. And so those are all the things you have to balance. But I want to be there. I'm excited about it. And so that's one where we're looking for our inflection point. I think, platforms are able to, a lot of them are able to send but not receive right now. I'm waiting for the rules to kind of, that's the thing for me is I want the rules to evolve and kind of all the underpinnings for FedNow to really take more solid shape. And so that's what I'm kind of watching for. And then, hearing from my client base, making sure that I'm not, spending money I don't need to, pursuant to our previous conversation. But yeah. I think it's exciting, and who knows all the different ways that it could change things.
Well, I want to just clarify one thing, because I think you said it the other way of what you meant, but I just want to clarify that are more people signing up to receive only versus send, or were you saying you think people are signing up to send more?
Well, I was talking about the platforms, the ones that I've seen. It seems like what the digital banking platforms are doing first is the ability to send. So like if I were to bring it on, that would be where it starts, and then that receiving would come later. But I don't know it. I mean, obviously you're able to, I guess, push rather than pull is what I'm trying to say. It looks like push is what's available rather than pulling.
I'll give you my take on a couple of things here. So yeah, as far as institution adoption, the institution adoption is significantly outpaced on receive only versus send. And then the FedNow network is a push payments network, but they are going to enable request for payment. So you can request that they push a payment, but yes, it'll always be a send or push network. I'd love to unpack a little bit deeper when you were talking about the kind of concern of liquidity, right? So if you look at kind of the payments ecosystem in the US today, and if you think about it on a 4-part quadrant, like a Gartner Magic Quadrant kind of thing, right? And on one axis you have speed, and the other axis you have cost, right? You have fast and slow, cheap and expensive. And today we basically have 3 of the 4 boxes covered. And the one we were missing was fast and cheap. And that's where FedNow slots in, right? FedNow, RTP, the real-time payments. And to your point, right, like the almost concern of what happens if it's faster and cheaper for people to move money out. Is there an associated liquidity risk of my financial institution? But just out of curiosity, I mean, like, so let's use SVB. We won't use you. I don't want to talk about a negative scenario and use your name. But let's say SVB, right? Really. Like to your point, when SVB failed, you were saying like the money was already moving out. They were just using wires, right? But it was moving out at a rapid pace. So do you think the introduction
Right.
of real-time payments actually really changes any of that liquidity risk? I'm genuinely curious what your thoughts are, because I don't really think about it from that perspective because I don't sit in your chair.
Well, so the reason I bring it up is because every channel that we open up along those lines is we've got to fully underwrite from a risk standpoint. And so that's another consideration for the bank before you go live on something. There's a whole project that has to take place, with risk assessment and the policies and procedures around the new platform and all that kind of stuff. And so those are the kind of things that you have to know. I don't think it necessarily it opens up another channel. And so it's just yet another way for people to move
Gotcha.
money out, in addition to ACH wires or whatever.
Yep.
And people are going to use whatever they want to use. But that's the way we have to approach it, and the way we have to develop everything ahead of time.
That makes
Is
a lot of sense.
understanding kind of what portion of our deposit base has access to each of these features, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, you think this, you're kind of alluding to what I was talking about too, right? Is where the quadrant we were missing was fast and cheap. And that's kind of the one we want to get to. So when you get to that one, it does kind of make a lot of other things irrelevant.
It does. It does. It
And
could.
that's a
Well,
huge change to our industry.
yeah. And I think, if the rules that surround it end up settling still so much more liberal than the ACH rules. I mean, ACH is its own ecosystem, its own, just extremely complex. The world runs on it, but it's extremely complex. And, so far the rules around FedNow are looking a lot more lax than that. I doubt that's where they're going to settle, but waiting to kind of see how all that frames up. But definitely if it's easier to use,
People will use it.
people will use it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point back to, what you were talking about at the start, which is just there is a lot of change that is happening that is not just little change. I mean, it's like shaking our foundational core levels of change. And it's not even just like one of those changes is happening in 50 years. It's like multiple are happening every year. That's a really big departure from the pace of innovation that this industry is used to. And if you follow the moniker of, well, this is how we've always done it, given those factors alone, you can tell it ain't going to work.
Well, unit left behind. So,
Well, Tyler, like I said, it genuinely gets me excited to have people like you on the podcast who are thinking about things from these perspectives. Because, yeah, I'm no stranger to saying that I really believe in this industry and the impact that it's having. But it's going to take people like you that are thinking outside the box and thinking about things differently and saying, what does our bank need to be in the new world of today, and what does it need to be prepared for the next evolution of humanity? That's exciting to me. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have you come and talk to us. But before I let you go, I have two final questions for you, if you don't mind.
okay.
Where do you go for information? So it seems like you've got kind of like a wide swath of different things that you pay attention to. So where do you go for intel?
Well, I think it's important to kind of cast a wide net. And so I'm sort of a member of all these different sort of newsletter kind of deals, but we get a lot of information from our core partnership with respect to definitely staying on top of advancements in the digital space. They do a regulatory roundup that's really good, but we are members of our bankers associations in Texas, TBA, Texas Bankers Association. In fact, our president, Tanya, serves on the board at TBA. And so those are great resources in terms of what's happening from a state level and kind of what legal stuff, regulatory stuff is coming down the pike and the efforts that they're making to exert influence over it, politically and things like that. IBAT, Independent Bankers Association in Texas, is another that we're heavily involved in. And so those are kind of the primary sources. But like I say, I'm a subscriber. So I watch, I don't get to read every one of them. Unfortunately, that's not my life and never will be. But when I'm tuned into a topic and I've got these, coming in from different areas, then I definitely will read articles So
I shouldn't be shocked that one of your answers was kind of the network of just some of the different leagues and associations and things. Just given your whole, like, I want to talk to real people about real things.
Right.
No, I love that. And then last but not least, if people want to connect with you and chat with you more, if they want to learn more about Prime Bank, how do they do that?
Sure. So prime.bank is the website. I am on LinkedIn. You're welcome to reach out. I'd be happy to, if there's anything from my experience base that could help you, I'd love to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of a busy day to come and just, well, I was going to say BS with me, but not BS with me.
But
I
we
guess.
don't do that.
Yeah,
We don't do that.
I know.
It was fun not BSing with you.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. It's fun not BSing with you, Tyler. Seriously, it really was. It's a lot of fun to be able to have these types of conversations and just like level set on a human level with people about, what are the things that are, impacting our ability to do the ultimate mission, which is to provide value to our communities and people who live in them. So this was great.
Right. Enjoyed it. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. Thanks for being a guest on the Digital Banking Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast powered by Typhon. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.